Now you've got the philosophy. You understand what it is we're doing. And what you need to know is the philosophy, the values, and the program essentials also drive the way we spend the money. Okay? So it's not just about how you deliver the program, it's about how we spend the money. So I'm going to give you a little funding history and talk about the reporting and all that kind of stuff. So let's start with the funding history. So this goes back to the 2001-2 fiscal year, where we received $5.474 million. Over the years, you see it stayed pretty steady. During those first few years, the early 2000s, the other library money plummeted. We were saved in many ways. We would get a 5% cut or whatever when the public library fund and transaction-based reimbursement funding for libraries was cut by the legislature. We think part of that is because they understand what adult literacy is. Okay? So we didn't see the crazy ups and downs that they saw in other aspects of not just library, but all kinds of programs in the state that were funded when we were having our budget issues in the early 2000s. We finally came down to that 5.064 for a while. They dropped us to 4.558 for 3 years until 10-11, and then there was a terrible year. That was the year when the governor created something called the trigger, and he said we will distribute no money until after the first tax assessment comes in December, and if it doesn't hit a certain level, then we will distribute no money. So we went with zero money that year. Now the impact of that was pretty devastating, but not as bad as we thought it would be. We had done some surveys of our literacy programs prior to the trigger cut happening, and what we found was that we were told by them that 30 of the 105 literacy programs we had at the time said they thought that without our funding, they could no longer exist. It turned out not to be that bad, which is good news, but there's a huge fear about what would happen at that point. This is also the time when we stopped separate funding for ELLI and mobile library literacy services because we didn't have it. Now what you need to know about, see that $0 in 11-12? By nothing less than a miracle, in the following fiscal year, we got $2.82 million. That was a 40% decrease from the prior year. However, what everybody tells me is that once something gets taken out of the budget, it never gets back in. So we were saved, literally. And this is one of the 2 times I'm going to make my pitch to be a member of CLA. Because what you need to know is that your state library cannot lobby on your behalf. We work for the governor and the legislature. Where the lobbyists live is at CLA, right? It's our dues to CLA and our registrations for the conference that fund CLA and fund the fact that we have lobbyists who speak on our behalf in Sacramento. So you'll hear it later today, but just want to let you know that by a huge yeoman's effort, by not just our lobbyists, but by the local programs who went nuts. I mean, here's the cool thing. We have a literacy representative on the CLA's legislative committee, and that year she worked very closely. That year was Carrie Gross, who was in Butte County. She's now in Livermore. She worked very closely with the Dillons, the lobbyists, and they worked with all of you to help your learners and your tutors write letters to the legislature. And what we learned from the Dillons as they went visiting the legislators was that when they sat down, everybody would pull out a large file filled with letters from literacy tutors and learners. So I'm sharing that with you because I can't lobby. When I retire, I can, but I can't now. But you and your tutors and learners can do that, and that's what made the difference in that year we went from 0 to 2.8. Last year, in 14-15, a legislator wrote a bill to get us $1 million of our funding restored. In the end, the governor blue penciled it and made it a 1-year only commitment. One of the beauties of your participation in the California Library Literacy Services program is once you're in forever unless you screw up. Okay? If it ever looks to us like you're not doing the performance essentials, you're not doing the value stuff, that's what we read for, then we will have a hearty conversation with you. But in the meantime, as long as the legislature gets us money and you do amazing stuff, you keep getting money, which means you can plan for the future. So when the governor gave us that $1 million one time only, it didn't really help people plan for the future, right? We suggested that they spend it on the additional money that year on things that they needed, like buy equipment or materials or whatever, because you couldn't necessarily create a staff position with that money, not knowing if it was going to be here for this year. Now, the most amazing thing happened, and that is for this year's budget, thanks to the work of the Dillons and the state librarian and all of you who wrote letters, $2 million of our dollars were restored, so we had $4.82 million to spend this year, which is why we were able to bring in new libraries, why we'll probably be able to bring in some new libraries again in a year or two, and why most of you who got your letters this week from the state librarian had a pleasant surprise. Diane and I were talking about earlier, the state librarian said, well, when the governor gave us $2 million, I said, no, you don't say the governor gave us $2 million. You say the governor restored our $2 million. And he said, oh, do you think he'd like that? I said, I don't care. That's how I'm going to talk about it. You know, you talk about it however you want, but I'm going to say they gave us back the money that belonged to us. So for the very first time in a long time, as you can see, we're not on the downward slope, we're on an upward slope. And as long as things go okay and the creek don't rise, we are hoping that we will have that same amount of money. But you can see how when it goes up and down, that's going to affect how much you get, not just how much we get in total. So that's why I wanted you to see that. You to see what the impact of this has been. We had 105 libraries before there was no money. In that year that we were told we would lose probably 30, we lost only 5, which was really wonderful, partly because the state librarian at that time provided some emergency funding out of LSTA grants for libraries that were definitely in a tough situation. Yep?
When you say you lost libraries, does that mean they stopped offering literacy?
They stopped offering the literacy service. We say they dropped out. We lost them, they dropped out. And some of them are here in the room today, again, I'm happy to say. We got the $2.82 million back. That was 38% less, but we had still lost a library that had been struggling. When people lost that much money, some of them lost staff, some of them laid off staff, they had trouble rehiring, or they just weren't able to pull it back, so we lost 1. We lost 2 in 2013-14, which was no increase. We didn't make any changes last year because that was one-time only funding, but we brought in 5 new libraries this year, and we're back up to 102. So woohoo, how cool is that? Let's talk about the funding stuff, the reporting and the funding timeline. So there, on the right-hand side of the booklet, the first white page is the annual CLLS application and reporting timeline. And let's just have an overview of that, how that works, or how it's supposed to work, we should say. For those of you that don't know, we have an online reporting system, which is pretty awesome, and about 3 years ago now, it crashed. And we thought we wouldn't get it back. It was pretty scary. Since then, we found some programmers who've been working on it with us, but those who've been reporting to us over these last 3 years know that these deadlines are sort of, this is what we'd like to do. So periodically, you'll get an email on the listserv that says, hello, Literacy Land, it's me again. So just know that I must say, though, we are closer than we've been. As I leave, we're closer to having it fixed and having it work. Andrea can actually get data out of it when I ask her. I can read all your reports. I could look at what you did last year. So all is good. It's just not all perfect yet. But here's basically how it works. In April, we will ask you to fill out an application if you plan to continue. Okay, so it's not an application where you say, please, can I have money? It's like, yeah, we want to keep going, and here's what we think we're going to do. Here's our plan for next year. Okay. In July, the program year begins. So the money you just got is for this current fiscal year, July 1, 2015 to June 30, 2016. You get, at the beginning of each year, you get the first award letter, which is just your baseline amount, and you get the second award letter later. And I'll show you how the funding formula works. You all got the second letter this week. In August, we ask you to do a final report. This is where you tell us how you spent the money, all of the money, on what programs, and you give us all your statistics. And I put in a paper copy of what the online report looks like. And mostly I did this, those of you that look at it all the time could care less, but mostly I did this for the new folks, so you could see what kind of data you need to be collecting this year.
Pay attention to that.
You can see what are the statistics that we want. The number of adult learners you served, the number who came in, the number who left, the number of tutors you had, the number you trained, the number who left, How many families did you serve if you had a family literacy program? How many children under 5 were in those families? How many books did you give them? You'll see the specifics in here. But primarily what we operate off of is that budget form that you're all familiar with. So the budget form will always look the same every time. So those of you who are new libraries, you're already familiar with it. So, and it's so lovely, I have to say. So basically what we look for in the, let's see if there's anything else I want to say about this. Okay, so that's the final report in August. And then after we get all the data, then we crunch the numbers into the funding formula, and that's when you get the second check, which just came this week. We usually like to do that by October 15th, and I was only a couple weeks late this time. That's not too bad. In December or January, it kind of depends on how much pain we've put you through with the reporting system, but we want to get back to these dates is what I'm saying here. We're going to ask you to send us a revised budget. So you're going to take the amount we've given you and all the amounts you know now from your city and whoever else is funding you, and you're going to show us the budget as you think it's going to be now for the whole fiscal year. Go ahead.
In the letter, it said it had language about you have to spend a certain amount and you're not meeting that, or how do you determine the amount that we're spending? Because it wasn't accurate based on my knowledge. Is that self-reported or are you pulling?
It's self-reported, yes, self-reported. So if it's not accurate, you need to take a look at it. But let me get through this and I'll show you the funding formula because there is a change this year that's really important to know. So you're going to send me that revised budget, and that becomes what Sharon Crowley in our budget office calls the approved budget, right? And that's what we're going to work off of. And at the end of the year, if you have any major changes from the approved budget, she'll ask you to do a budget change form. That's what triggers that. Okay, so really you're just reporting to us, there's the application, there's the final report, there's the revised budget, and that's all, right? We used to have we used to have a mid-year report and a final report. We don't have mid-year anymore because we don't have any staff to read it. Let's talk about the funding formula. Remember I said it's driven by those values and performance essentials. So there's 3 parts to the funding formula. One is a baseline, and that's we recognize that everybody needs to have at least a portion of a staff person to run this program. You can't run this without a staff member, so that's our nod to that. We would like it to be way more than that, but I'll tell you that over the years, it's been $10,000 until this year. And this year, ladies and germs, it was $18,000, which is great. That means everybody got that check in July. However, what that means, and this is what Laura was thinking about, and I was talking to somebody else who got this paragraph in your letter, we require that since we give you we require at least a $10,000 commitment on the part of the local library who's receiving funds from us. Now that can be cash in terms of the staff time you commit to it. It can be money that comes from the Rotary Club. It can be fundraiser, wherever that money comes from. We call it local money. It's anything but what we give you. You have to show us that you have at least as much as the baseline we gave you. Now, the change is this. Now we have a baseline of $18,000. And there are some of our smaller programs in particular who have been living on that $10,000 maximum they had to provide locally. It's now going up to $18,000 for next year, which means that if you don't provide the local amount of at least $18,000, you won't get the other 2 parts of the funding formula. Okay, so you get less money. Remember, this was all designed as a state-local partnership, right? We never intend, and the legislature never intended the state's money to be the sole source of support or even the largest source of support. That our money is meant to be wrapped around based on how much the community needs it and cares about it. So if you look at our statistics, for every dollar we give you, you contribute usually another $4 to $5 or $6 per dollar. That's one of the things that makes us attractive to the legislature. We are a great bargain. For those $4 million they're giving us, you're using about $20 million, right? Because you've got that kind of local support in the community. So that's what that is all based on. So yeah, there are a few programs that are in that situation, but we can talk about how you get there. So the baseline. Then, in order to recognize that we are a state and local program, and to recognize local support, we provide a match. Now, the match has never been a dollar for dollar. It was intended to be when the legislature first started this, but there's never been enough money, right? So the match is an amount on every local dollar you provide. So we have some programs like LA Public, they put in $1 million locally because it's huge. They have a huge program. And we have others who put in the 10,000 because they're small, right? So that's one of the ways the formula deals with large and small libraries and libraries that have big services and libraries that have small services, is we provide a little extra money to you based on how much local money you provide to adult literacy. Okay? Now, if you spend that additional money on ESL, we don't match on that. If you spend it on adult literacy, we will. If you spend it on family literacy, we will. Because remember, now we view adult and family literacy as one program. It's services to the adult learner. But you don't have to provide family literacy. It's just that if you do, that's another piece. The third part of the funding formula is a per capita amount on every adult learner you serve. And that's based on the fact that the most important thing are the adult learners. So for every learner you serve, you get X amount. And that amount varies widely based on how many libraries are in the program, how many learners are served in a given year, how much money we have, how much local money is spent. So Andrea puts together this giant honkin' spreadsheet that she and I work with, and it goes through several revisions until we see how the money plays itself out and make decisions about how to put the formula together. This year was a wonderful time to do the formula because we actually had money to put into it, which was really cool. So everybody benefited from that. So that's the three parts of the formula. The baseline recognizes staffing is critical. The match recognizes the state-local partnership. And the per capita recognizes the fact that adult learners are the most important thing we do. And again, that's another one of those levelers, balancers, because the larger programs get more money, the smaller programs get less money. See how that works? So over time, you can adjust the amount you get from us based on how much local money you put into adult literacy and how many adult learners you serve. If those numbers drop in a given year, your amount from us is going to go down. If they get higher in a given year, your amount from us is going to get higher. So it provides you an incentive to understand that as you grow, we will support that. Okay, so I just wanted you to be very clear about this whole philosophy values thing. It flows through the funding formula as well. That's how we made this up. And again, we didn't make this up in a vacuum. We went out and had meetings with library literacy people all over the state. We talked and talked. We didn't think they'd want the match, and they said, oh yeah, the match is really important. Even though it's a very small percentage on a dollar, we can always say to anybody we're talking to about funding, the more you give us, the more we get from the state library. So use that as much as you like. The budget form you've all seen. Basically, what we're looking for is on this page, this is your sources of revenue. And if you haven't figured it out yet, all the things listed on the side, the sources, are the common things, sources that our library literacy programs get money from. So if you're looking for a way to find more money, look here and see if you haven't tapped some of those, right? We don't require you to get any other funding sources, except your library should be providing some support, and you'd have to have it at a baseline. But the more you get from us. So we ask you to not only show us where it comes from, but how much is spent in each of your programs. And this is where we get to, so you see that if you have an LE program, you're going to put money in there if you have an MLLS. But you can't put any of our money in the ESL column there. That's the grayed out box. But we do want to see where your ESL money is coming from. And we keep track of that. We talk to the legislature about how many ESL learners you serve because there's a need in the community, okay? And we're also interested in any other programs. And there's a number of other programs, like some, I mentioned earlier, some local libraries have created K-12 tutoring programs. You're going to show us all that information, including how much staff time you put in that. We're not going to put any money into it, but we want to see we need the whole picture of your literacy program and how you're staffed and what your staff is doing. So that's what that's about. And that's what is on the back. The other piece you'll always see is the staff commitment piece and how the money gets spent. And Andrea has this on a spreadsheet she can send you that does the calculations for you, so you don't have to try to do it in a vacuum, that's for sure.